right, welcome to Solar Sunday. I'm joined by Ed, aka Taurmenos. We're just gonna talk a little bit about some current events, what's going on in the world today, and two things in particular: penguins and ice. Probably in that order. That we can segue into whatever subjects come to mind, because it's kind of just a general discussion time. It's good to be abreast of what's going on, even if it's good also to not get too caught up in what's going on. Ed, have you seen The Penguin? Everyone's calling him the. Sorry, I was interrupting you right there.
I have seen The Penguin, and I've even seen some AI versions of The Penguin.
Of course, my favorite ones are the like the watercolor painting ones with quotes underneath that are starting to circulate around. It's very like romantic in like the 19th century romanticism. Forward Forge, evening bowls, evening gentlemen. For those of you who have not seen The Penguin, it's this clip from a documentary narrated by Werner Herzog, who is one of my favorite comedic characters out there. My introduction to him was just of a clip of him being interviewed about speaking French and how he would never the languages he speaks, and he speaks French, but he would never speak it. He was once made to speak French at gunpoint in Africa, and he said he regrets it tremendously. He wishes he had taken the bullet instead. That's my kind of humor. I enjoy that. But he was narrating this documentary, I guess, from a while ago, like 2 decades ago. But you know how the internet is. It finds these bits and recycles them. And there's a clip of him commenting on, but it was this one penguin that caught our attention. And the camera zooms in on this one penguin, and Werner Herzog says, "It would not go to the feeding grounds, but neither would it turn back to the colony. Instead, it turned to the mountains and went." And indeed, the penguin just turns and goes off into the mountains. And this has been this like tremendously inspiring and motivating and like just captivating meme. And there's a lot of something there. There's a lot of like pacing a common feeling there. That a lot of people feel like they don't want to go to the feeding grounds or back to the colony either. And it's been memed into all sorts of different variations and stuff. And we were talking about it in the group. And we're like, there is something vaguely solar in like the religious context about this, not to make everything too ham-fistedly fit our like system. But, at a religious theological level, it feels like society is faced between two options, right? We have on the one hand the myth of progress. Do we go to the feeding grounds? Do we go to onward and upward in this sort of progressive myth of eternal improvement into the pod with the bugs and all that? Or finding that dissatisfying, do we retreat back into the past, return back to the colony, and try to just preserve tradition in this in this myth of a golden age of some distant past that we're just trying to hold on to, or maybe even return to? And faced between those two options, there is something solar in the like third option sense of like, what if we just rejected both of those myths and went for beauty instead? It is something like maybe it's a little bit what's the word, opportunistic to claim this for ourselves, but it's fun to do it. It's a meme. We don't have to be super serious about it, and we do have a lot of guys who are very into mountain climbing in the group, so we have some claim, I think, to it, especially in Canada.
There's kind of a fourth option there, which is watching that penguin go. There's also the option of it's just going into the unknown.
Yes. Well, so some people jumped in and said, what was going on there's a lot of psychoanalysis of the penguin. And some people say, oh, the penguin was depressed. And other people's like, no, it's not depression. It's like romantic yearning for the ideal or for beauty of the, and it's like, are those two things that different? Is the absence of these grander ideals identical with depression, but you just are no longer entertained by the matrix anymore? Or like there's all different ways to take it. Some scientists weighed in, I guess, and they said what was happening was that penguin had lost its lifetime mate and it was feeling depressed, so it decided to basically off itself by going off into the mountains. But as we've talked about in previous shows, like, we all have to die. How you choose to die matters. It's not a bad way to go. You know, it's a beautiful way to go in its own way. And like the most commonly attached quote to these watercolor renditions of the lone penguin is usually seems to be this Nietzsche quote, which is like, I know of no greater fate, I think, than dying in pursuit of something truly grand, or something to that effect. And like, no matter what that penguin is actually thinking, like, the action captures a feeling that we have that we project onto the penguin, and that projection is what we're talking about, not the actual feelings of the actual penguin. So it's been fun. It's been fun to see that. And the people who say it's the nihilist penguin because it's going to its death, I think, misunderstand why the meme is attractive in the way that they understand what the film what's the jazz drumming film I love to bring up, not quite My Tempo, what's that movie, Whiplash, there we go. Like, they misunderstand Whiplash in the same way, because the perfection is in a single moment, but they can never just appreciate the moment. They're always thinking, but then what happens after that, you know? And they lose track of the beauty of the moment itself. And, you know, it's the same, a little bit of a similarity, I think, with if it's not perfect forever, if it's not a system, man, then it's like nihilism or something. Nietzsche gets called a nihilist in the same way, but
no,
the mythical penguin gets to die well. Yes, exactly. Well, that's one off the ice flow. Shall we talk about the ice itself? This was a big one this week. Did you, because were there two this week, or was one of them from last week?
Last week, this week. Okay.
Short succession, both in the same state, both in the same city. Minneapolis has been very busy recently. I've been getting into and dragging Agnitor into some fights along with me online about this, because there's a lot of people jumping in to discuss these shootings. But in both cases, for anyone who's been off grid or been averting their gaze from the news, first of all, good for you, very wise. Yeah. But we'll fill you in anyways because you're watching us. The first instance, which was like a week ago, there was a woman who, like, the short version is ICE is kind of half surrounding her vehicle. One of them comes up and demands that she gets out of the car. He orders her to get out of the car. Instead of getting out of the car, she accelerates. She steps on the gas, turns her wheel, and tries to drive away. Now, in the process of driving away, she clips one of the ICE officers. It doesn't look like she's trying to hit him, but she does kind of tap him on the way out. And that ICE officer, who couldn't see the direction of her wheels, assumed she was trying to hit him or run him over, very quickly pulls out his gun and shoots her, killing her. And then, like, she crashed, and that was the end of that. The background on that was that, well, we'll skip the background for a moment. So that happened like a week ago. And then this recent one, also in Minneapolis, I don't know the full details about, but it looks like ICE was at a was doing some operation, and some guy showed up and tried to jump in between an ICE agent and a woman or something like that. Like he tried to jump in and like put himself in a physical altercation with ICE. He quickly got surrounded, maced, and then a gun got pulled off his belt by ICE. And then, as best as I can tell, the it looks like the ICE officer ND'd the pistol, the gentleman's own pistol, into the ground by mistake. And then that sound of that fire triggered all the other ICE officers to be like, oh my gosh, someone's shooting. And then they pulled out and then they shot him. Now a little detail from the gun world that some fellow gun nerds might have picked up. It looked, I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like the gun that he pulled off the gentleman's waist was a SIG P320, which has been getting in all kinds of trouble. SIG has been getting into all kinds of trouble because that gun is apparently not drop safe and has been known to ND. So I don't know all the details of that. It probably still was the ICE agent's fault, but it might not have been, you know. So what we have are these instances where, in both cases, it looks to me like the ICE agent was at fault to some degree. You know, maybe it's third-degree murder, maybe it's just manslaughter, maybe it's just gross negligence. I don't know exactly. But there's a tremendous amount of focus on this, and I think it's easy for people to lose perspective and context on the broader picture of what's going on. And for context, I'll drop some ancient experience here. Back in 2016 or 2017, I was actually personally involved in some like anti-Antifa groups. One in particular that I was kind of leading in Seattle, Portland area. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was, the degree of like what we were getting into. Once I began to get a glimpse of what we were actually dealing with, what Antifa was and what these groups were, I was like, oh God, this is so much bigger. This is big boy stuff. We are literally just a bunch of like young dudes who think this is like stupid that people are beating each other up in the streets. We had no idea like the scale of political influence at play. So we backed off and we're like, oh, we don't want any part. And we were very fortunate that none of us got like hurt or imprisoned or anything crazy as a result, because these groups, the Antifa groups and these similar types of groups, are organized at like a professional level. And it looks like both of the people shot, both the woman in the car and the nurse, who the guy who got his SIG pulled off his waist. I'm 90% sure it's a SIG, not 100%. They were involved in these kinds of groups, not Antifa by name, but similar kinds of street level political activist groups. And they are going out to create friction. They are going out in order to create opportunities for the other side to mess up. And then they're going to film them and they're going to plaster them all over everywhere. It's part of the MO of the group and those sorts of groups. The scariest people at these events are not the black bloc people. The black bloc people are like the tool that does the thing. The weapon are a bunch of usually very nerdy looking people in green hats called the National Lawyers Guild. And they are, despite their name, they do have some degree of legal training, but many of them don't. Many of them are literally just in green hats there with clipboards, and they're there as legal observers. They're there just to compile biased information so that cases can be made either to protect their activists or to legally go after and target anyone who tries to do anything even remotely out of line. Any slip slightly too far, and they can go after you, and they go after you fairly hard. That's the like the real weapon, or the protection for the weapon. So it's a very, they have a very well organized street activist infrastructure that but because it's compartmentalized and separated out, they can play off each individual actor as like, oh, just an ordinary citizen or whatever. That was my experience in 2016, 2017, all the way up through 2018, where I was like, we do not want to have anything to do with this anymore. And it's the same kind of organizing structure that we see here. If that does not change your, if this knowledge of like these structures being in place at these kinds of protests doesn't change your understanding of it, I would ask why not. And by all means, don't take my word for it. You know, my experience and background research is not yours. You should not take my word for it. But like, we've been seeing a nonstop slew of hoaxes, and hoaxes that the late and great Scott Adams especially called Rupar edits of edited film clips that, when it was clipped and taken out of context, inverted the meaning of what was actually seen. I'm not saying that that's what these are, but it does mean you can't trust film. You can't think you knew what happened just because you saw something. And the 4 examples I gave online earlier today were the Fine People hoax, which Scott Adams called the tentpole hoax, because it was the hoax that justified morally all of the Democrats and never Trump Republicans to lie about everything else about him. It's like, well, if he's supporting white nationalists, which he did the opposite. You know, he was praising people who were both supporting and opposing the preservation of the Robert E. Lee statue. He was basically saying, hey, there's good arguments for it and there's good arguments against it. There are very fine people on both sides. And I'm not talking about the white nationalists. They need to be condemned absolutely. And they just cut that part out and pretended like the both sides was referring to the white nationalists at Charlottesville and the people opposing it, when he explicitly said the opposite. That justifies basically no holds barred, gloves off, anything goes, including lying. And then all these other hoaxes that we've seen, the drinking bleach hoax, he never said that. He said disinfectant, bookended with both sides specifying he meant light. And of course, they just cut those bits out, took disinfectant, said, oh, he means bleach. And then people think they heard it with their own ears. He never said that. One that someone was really taking issue with, not the Covington kids one, that one I think most people accept as a hoax now, but was the I can't breathe George Floyd hoax. Someone said, oh, you can see it on video. I saw it with my own eyes on video. It's like, did you see the part where he was saying he couldn't breathe before they even took him out of the car? You know, no, they did not, you know, because that, like, logically disproves the idea that his breathing problem was caused by Chauvin's hold. But again, these kinds of edits, and I don't mean to expand the domain of context so broadly that you need to know everything in order to understand everything. You don't need to have my background with like Antifa in Seattle. You don't need to have a deep understanding of like the Italian origins of Antifa and their like German variants in the 1920s and all that nonsense. It is useful to know, but like, it's a basic understanding of how these news cycles use video clips and frame them, and how they can prime you to see what they want you to see in these clips is truly extraordinary. And like, it's been interesting just as an exercise to watch the breakdowns of the Charlie Kirk shooting in this way, because some people have slowed down and focused upon and put little red circles around little bits of video that seem to prove demonstrably that it was not a bullet that killed him. that it was his lapel mic that seemed to explode. And you can even see the little concussive thing. See, and there's the guy in the crowd who pressed the button. You can see how he's focused and all this. And you're like, wow, that's like really compelling. And then you show that to a friend and they're like, oh yeah, check out this video. And then they show you a slow-mo video where you can literally see the bullet in flight. It's like, oh, never mind, I guess. But like this kind of one screen, 2 movies, or in this case, one screen, 6 movies, seems to be a really serious issue that we have to deal with and should slow down people's like certainty in the conclusions that they're coming to. Because not only are these things ambiguous and we weren't there, maybe you didn't know that these people were activists that were trying to instigate something. Maybe you didn't know that the officer who got hit by the car had been hit by another car and dragged and horrifically injured like 6 months prior in a similar event. And maybe that doesn't matter. It's like, okay, well, he should take some leave and do something light duty while he mentally recovers. Fair enough. These like law agents do need some accountability, of course. But anyways, it's just interesting to see the bifurcation of perspectives. And the primary bifurcation does not seem to be around facts. It seems to be more around the value frame through which you view these things. Has that been kind of your experience?
Yeah, for sure.
Roland Clay says, Lemmings. They circulated a video saying that lemmings commit suicide en masse. It was completely falsified, but started a myth that persists to this day. Yes. Related, birds aren't real. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, they're real.
Meme
they're
joke.
Real little drones.
Yeah, including that penguin. No, don't say that.
No.
Don't take our penguin away.
That penguin just needed a damn break, man.
Yeah, the penguin thought all the other birds were NPCs, so he left. But anyways, so like the context I tried to put on it, because there are some serious complaints, and I thought I'd try my best to steelman like the arguments, and the best I could do, putting myself in the mind of an ICE critic, is there's essentially 5 criticisms I could come up with. The first one, and like the most serious one of our guys actually mentioned this, and it was a very, I thought, a very fair criticism, is there's a real problem with the lack of training in these ICE agents. And he actually happened to have some insider knowledge on this. He said, many of these ICE guys have no law enforcement training. They are drawing from a lot of bounty hunters specifically. And they're kind of cowboys, and not in a good way. So that can lead to some problem. But I mean, you don't even have to go to that world. You can look at the regular law enforcement in the world, the ones with law enforcement training, and see some extraordinary displays of incompetence in places, as you would find in literally any portion of any population of any trade. You know, there's some number that are going to be incompetent. And if you have cameras on them all the time, it will make the rounds. I remember seeing a clip of 2 police officers in a McDonald's. They were trying to arrest some meth head who was like not fighting back, but not cooperating either. And these 2 officers just could not tackle him down. They just couldn't do it. And he wasn't even fighting. He was just like refusing to be tackled. And it was like the most embarrassing thing to watch. And eventually they pulled him out and they tased him, and the taser had no effect. Yeah, it was because he was like strung out or something. And he just kept, they like didn't know what to do. And it's like, man, this is atrocious, you know? And those are real trained city cops. So the lack of training, I think, is a valid criticism, but we're set within a context where we have, like, since 1965, the United States has suffered the largest movement of peoples in all of human history. And Vox Day has this great book. It's somewhat, it's called Cuckservative. No, I'm thinking of a different book. I'm thinking of the essay from There Will Be War, Volume 10. I'm sorry. Wrong book, same editor at least, where basically it historically there are like 5% of cases where we have migrations of people over a certain size that don't result in massive war and or genocide and or the collapse of empires. Like, people forget the collapse of Rome was primarily an immigration problem. Like, by the time of the collapse, there were less Romans in Rome than there were foreigners, basically. And it was a civil collapse, cultural collapse, before it was a military collapse. And that played a role in the sacking of Rome in, was it like 399 or whenever? So like, and of course the Gothic invasion, which they were really invited in. They said, we need help. The Goths were allowed in. The Goths got upset about some other unrelated thing and started pillaging, and it went all the way to Rome, and that's how that happened. We have endured the largest movement of people since 1965 in the fastest time frame in all of human history. There is no way that ends well, right? All of these other, everything even remotely comparable, resulted in massive war and or genocide and the collapse of empires. So we have a huge logistical undertaking to try to fix this before it gets bad, if the aversion of bad is even still possible. And so the speed of that logistical undertaking on a budget, because we're also in massive debt, as these things tend to go together, and Minneapolis, the state in which both these shootings happened, where the presence of ICE was justified by the fraud and corruption that was leading to this kind of debt, gives us some insight into a connection between the immigration problem and the debt problem. But that's neither here nor there. So we've got a huge logistical undertaking to handle and very little time really to do it. The lack of training, it's always better to have more training. We don't have infinite time or resources, So that's not an excuse for the officers. If they were in the wrong, they need to be, fired at the very least, probably charged with something. But taking these bad instances and saying, therefore ICE is bad. It's like, if people dying is bad, look at the amount of crime and sexual assault and fraud and murder that we've seen because of immigration. It dwarves what we're seeing from ICE by multiple orders of magnitude, and it's the selectivity of it that makes us it's sort of hard to take some of these criticisms very seriously. And I think that point segues from this first criticism, the lack of training, which is valid, to a second criticism, which is this fear of authoritarianism. Like, what about, someone asked me, like, how far do things have to go before you become afraid of authoritarianism? It's like, well, I grew up listening to Christopher Hitchens. I grew up reading George Orwell. I've been in that camp for a very long time. It's hard to feel like, oh, that's a concern we need to worry about somewhere down the road after we went through COVID. Like, COVID was everything that they're telling us we now need to maybe worry about. Like, oh, ICE is in danger of putting us in like concentration camps. It's like, did you not see Australia during COVID?
Yeah.
That's what they wanted to do here too. And
apparently half of the population really wanted that.
Yeah.
They wanted you eliminated over it.
Yeah. And still do. So
that's true.
Yeah. It's really, Andrew and Roland are saying most law enforcement aren't up to snuff. They try their best. It's hard to when you're running a very, very large institution, to create a standard level of competence and bring everybody up to it. And it's especially hard to maintain that appearance when you have people who are as organized and almost as well funded going out specifically to test that competence and to try to draw you into overreaction, which is like what we're dealing with now. So anyways, and Roland was asking, how can they train you for that anyways? Yeah, it's like, it's kind of a novel challenge in many ways. Like the authoritarianism is a problem, but we're already past that. We've seen all kinds of political attacks. We saw the shooting of Aaron Danielson, Portland, in broad daylight, all kinds of other attacks. Steve Scalise getting shot, Donald Trump getting shot, Charlie Kirk getting shot a little bit more successfully than Trump. And I'm not trying to portray it all as left on right, because there will inevitably be some right on left as well. Not as much at the moment, but don't count on that for all time necessarily. But it does feel like things are escalating, and they're escalating not just in sporadic little one-offs, but in like organized aggression and organized friction. We see this at like the state government level in Minnesota, of all places, and a little bit in California and New York and other places as well. So within the context of a cold civil war, like the fear of authoritarianism feels like just behind the ball. Like you're operating in a peacetime frame. We're not in peacetime. What are you talking about? Authoritarianism? Libertarianism is not an option here. It's not on the table. So anyways, like that, there are some people who still seem to think that is an option. I think they're operating from a very noble and principled place. They say, I'm going to live like Rorschach by these principles, bar anything. And I have a kind of admiration for it. But it is very naive. It's very like you will kill the grounding of these principles with your dedication to it. And the people that you're supporting in this one way will absolutely take them away in a second, like they did with COVID. And so like paired with the authoritarian concern, which is a civic concern, there's a psychological criticism, which is that of bootlicking. I got that charge a couple times, like, oh, you're defending ISIS. Like, well, first of all, if these particular agents did something wrong, they should be charged and locked up, right? But the psychology is interesting because there's this insinuation that you should not ever venerate or respect authority in this. Like any respect for authority is illegitimate. It's not just illegitimate. It's like disgusting. It's like, how could you degrade yourself in this way, respecting authority, respecting the law? And what I tried to say to these people is like, what you're offering in place of authority and law are basically principles. And there's something good about that. I have a kind of admiration for it. I like the people who are susceptible to the bootlicking argument. Like, oh God, that's gross. I kind of jive with that. But there isn't actually like a grand metaphysical distinction between venerating principles that tell you not to be a bootlicker and venerating the law and the agents of order that do it. There's a philosophical difference there, but we're now in the direction of like, okay, which law is more important? The law of principle or the law of like society? We could say convention versus nature. There's a number of different ways you can frame it. And then it becomes a philosophical argument. Well, how did we get to these principles in the first place? And many of them actually did come from societies first. And it becomes a fun place. But I don't think anyone is actually for dismissing authority full stop. They're not for dismissing, at least if authority can include principles. And not to make it too philosophical, but when you go down the philosophical rabbit hole of these principles, you are likely to find just language there. And then actually it is the principles that wind up being vapid would be too far, but there's an, how do I put this? There's an insufficiency in the principles as they are stated when they are separated from the way of being and the culture that those principles came from. I think like the First Amendment is a really good example of this, and like the freedom of speech gets very, if you take the freedom of speech absolutely and literally, it becomes completely self-destructive. And it took me a very, very long time to realize that, because I was a very gung-ho pro-free speech guy for like a decade. So it took me a very long time to come to terms with the fact that, okay, freedom of speech is not this like absolute, you should be able to say anything you want without consequences. And the hard argument
based on that.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And like the hard counter is not, as is often misquoted, the like shouting fire in a crowded theater. It's just libel. Like libel is the hard counter to absolute free speech, because it turns out you can actually really, really hurt people with libel. But that doesn't mean that free speech is not worth defending. You just have to understand free speech in the context of, in the sense that it was meant in. And it's an organic, culturally ingrained social sense of what this actually means and entails. And it turns out you get that from other people. You get that from models. And so if you want to embrace principles while rejecting human authority, while rejecting the man, that actually becomes philosophically difficult to do once you dig down to the roots of these principles. So anyways, the bootlicking one, it sounds very offensive on its face. It's actually a very interesting criticism, though. And I would encourage people who have used that criticism of others, who've called them bootlickers. And by the way, there is valid use of that criticism. Like if a right-wing guy, like the sort of guy who wears a red MAGA hat, who is super pro Second Amendment, super pro open carry, and he watches this second shooting that happens and has no questions. It's like, well, he screwed with ICE, so I guess he got what was coming to him. Like, that is like, there is a psychological question to look at there. So yeah. Anyways, I think that's an interesting one that sort of ties in with some of the philosophical aspects of solar idealism, because there is a question about what are our ideals and like what is the grounding of them. If you care about this independent spirit that many people on kind of both the right and the far left kind of embrace, there's an interesting kind of kindred spirit between like hard right anarcho-capitalist libertarians and a certain kind of working class punk Antifa blue collar anarchist. Like there is common ground there in this independent spirit. But I think that there's something interesting to explore in the principles there. So anyways.
And what about, the questions about how much, that things are being orchestrated, and then, you have right, left, and, some people line up with those things in a tribal way based on certain things, whether it's real values that they hold or it's just purely sentiment, but the bottom line is that, not everybody that's on either of these so-called sides is going to 100% agree with every single aspect. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, personally, it's like I'm in a good cult. I don't really need to identify with these other two cults that are at war with each other, though there are, though there are stakes, there are, obviously my life is involved in this because I'm an American, I live here, I don't wish, sort of just randomly wish bad things to happen to people that I don't know or I don't agree with, just a few times. I could think of a few handfuls of examples, but
I know they're doing it for us.
yeah, exactly. But it's like,
but yeah, I know what you mean.
From the perspective of solar idealism and the archetypes, it's like how do we react? Where is our self-control, our emotional control? Are you immediately going to experience incredibly intense emotions over every time something happens in these scenarios? Or are you going to stand back?
Yes, that standing back is so valuable. That stepping back and regaining perspective is like whenever a super emotionally charged event happens, it is always best to like pause and take those emotional tunnel vision blinders off for a second. And like sometimes that stepping back will like, oh, I see the context of this event. It is exactly as fucked up as it initially appeared. Yep, this is like it really important. But like sometimes you'll be like the meaning changes. And I feel like so many of these events, people get so caught up in the details that they forget the context and they forget the grander picture, and they let their emotional they let their souls really get dragged around like puppets by people who can direct and concentrate their focus. And to your earlier point, Roland is saying people are pro-authority when it comes from someone in an institution they hold in good standing, which is basically just the tribalism claim, which is the big danger. And like, we can't help but be tribal. It is maybe important that we be tribal, but not let our tribalism cloud our ability to see clearly. And that is a problem. If you're in, and like Edmund Burke was one of the early American, well, he wasn't American, but it was the early proponents of political tribalism. Says, no, there actually is value in having a two-party system. And here's why, and blah, blah, blah. And that's all fine as long as you don't allow it to cloud your vision. And I think that is the big problem when people allow their loyalty to make them see things that didn't happen in order to say my side is always right and their side is always wrong. It's like, no, our guys can screw up and their people can do something really morally decent or really strategically clever, which is, I think, the latter is a degree of what's going on.
So many people are very skeptical of somebody that is not all in with one or the other.
Yeah. It's a threat to loyalty. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's, that's a kind of freedom and a type of independence. And
yeah,
I don't want to, I mean, what? Yeah, it's just the emotional aspect of it, and then there are people that will think if you can say, wow, as a human being, that's really awful what happened. And I think it really sucks for all the people involved. I wasn't there and I don't know really what happened, but shit, I would hate if that happened to me or somebody that I know. That really sucks. And it's like, oh, you're a psychopath because you're not breaking down. You're not expressing outward extreme emotions and having to like be really, really upset about it. But it's like you can experience, we all have our issues, I guess, but it's like emotions are something that you can experience without having to present in a certain way.
And it's often wise
really
too.
Bad. It's like, like at my mother's funeral, which was a long time ago, like I was not crying. but it's because of a certain sort of like, you know, it wasn't about it wasn't about me at that moment. It was about hearing about her life, right?
Right.
You know,
There's a time and a place.
yeah, the ladies were crying, of course, but you know,
Yeah.
it's just.
But like so much of what we're seeing is about the presentation, and it's a very, very carefully curated and structured presentation. Roland points out Obama had pro-ICE videos in the news, and Democrats loved it at the time. Yes, like 2014 Bernie Sanders immigration policy was basically Donald Trump's immigration policy. Obama wasn't actually. He wasn't great on immigration, but he wasn't terrible either. He actually did a semi-decent job on immigration, as far as I can tell. I might be wrong on that because we've been suffering under Hart-Celler for some time. But yeah, the moral browbeating you're talking about, where they'll say, if you aren't expressing outrage in this moment, then you're like heartless. And I think you can respond with Churchill's old saying. It's like, well, okay, like I'm old enough to know that like there's a naivete to just expressing this all the time. The like anyone under the age of 30 who isn't a leftist has no heart. Anyone over the age of 30 who isn't a right winger has no brain. Like that is true, I think, at a general emotionally expressive level. And so much of leftist presentation is just performative emoting. And the right does it too sometimes, and it's annoying when they do it. But it's not as inherently like that. And it's so frustrating to see left-wing intellectuals and thinkers and activists try to present their platform in like an intellectually serious way. Like you'll see like a Bernie Sanders type guy. I profoundly dislike Bernie Sanders, by the way, but I respect him. I kind of like him. I disagree with him, but I kind of like him, you know. I remember
he's an old man screaming at you from the other side of a river.
Yeah, like he's like wrong about everything except immigration, but he seems sincere, you know. And that sincerity got him in trouble because he would go up and he'd stand before a crowd of people and say, we need to do this and this and this and bring this down by 14% and do this and that. And he was giving like a numerical economic presentation, and the audience would yawn. I was just like, and someone else would get up and shout about racism, like, oh yeah, you know. And that's like the right does suffer from that too. But I think the extremity of the emotional appeals on the left has been, at least for the last decade, far more insane. That might change, you know, down the road. Probably will change down the road. We might get some truly insane.
Encountering it is exhausting. I mean, I think the sort of the extreme versions of both the right and the left are kind of exhausting. Yeah. And you know, and it's also, you know,
both the feeding grounds and the colony.
You know, you yeah, and you can say, you know, you can say the sun shines equally on everybody, and I also don't fucking care. You know, yes. There's, you know, people. I have things to do, and it's like, and how much agency does an individual have? Like, and this is all about like standing in solidarity. You know, and there's a place for that, but that's for me, that's the order of fire, and it's sort of, yeah, it's like you can say I don't care without it being something that's cold, or just being a sort of like, you know, defense mechanism. It partly could be, but
right, we don't need to go full Manfredo, you know, on the whole thing, but we can say, look, in the broader context of what's going on, I hear you on these small details. They matter. We should try our best to fix them. But what's going on at the small level cannot be allowed to change what we're trying to pursue and what must be done at the larger picture. And that ties in with Andrew Guzman in the comments left this very, I think, poignant and very common sentiment. He said, from a solar perspective, we entrusted an agency to help battle chaos with order. But what happens when that power turns on those who entrusted it? Is a new fire necessary? I wish I could say more. Well, like that's a very strong temptation, right? It's like, well, this mechanism that we tried is failing, and should we start something new? Like I think, again, when we step back and look at the large picture, if we look at a percentage of failure, like how many times does something have to succeed in order for it to be considered as success? How many times does something have to fail for it to be considered a failure? Is it one time? Is it a dozen times in an operation of hundreds of thousands of people trying to do, a lot of things with a lot of money? I think maintaining that perspective is super critical. And this really is, he was asking specifically about the solar perspective. The solar perspective is the step back perspective. And it allows you to say, as you said, without coldness, like in the context of the broader view of what is important for our society and for our values, this matters, but it is not enough to say this like method is bad, or we can even say this method is awful. It sucks, but it is necessary. Chemotherapy is awful. We have a young lady at our work who's going through her second round of breast cancer. She got diagnosed late last year, and so she's been going through chemo, and it's awful. We would never say, because it is awful and because it's just causing this horrible lethargy and hair falling out, that it's therefore, what, this is just this is not working, we'll just do something else. Well, then you just die, right? Then you just die. So I think like maintaining the perspective is the way to stay firm in your convictions. And this is like we've talked in a couple of podcasts now about Christianity and our frustration with it. But it's one of the things that I think Christians get right when they have the right understanding of faith. And here I think I have a sympathy for Protestants. I think Protestants are totally wrong and Orthodox are totally right about faith, where faith is something less like blind belief and more like loyalty and steadiness in the face of momentary shifts of feeling and momentary doubt. And like that.
Let Jesus take the wheel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let Jesus take the wheel is the Protestant notion of faith. The Orthodox notion of faith is something more like marital fidelity.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I've been convinced of this. I've come in through conviction, not by just like, oh, I believe. And in the face of doubt, momentary doubt, in the face of feelings of injustice, I'm going to hold on to that, which is how I feel about Cardano right now, if I'm being totally honest. In the crypto market, crypto, why have you forsaken me? But I'm holding on to a faith, which is a belief in the quality of this particular project. Not all crypto, most of it is rug pulls and scams. Don't take financial advice from me. But I was convinced of the quality and value of one particular project. And the fact that we've gone through a weird cycle doesn't change that. It's like, okay, things didn't play out exactly on the timeline I was expecting. Man, I could be disillusioned by this, but no, the fundamental belief about this has not changed. It's still the same project. I'm still holding on. And that there is something solar to maintaining that perspective, I think. Andrew adds, Taurmenos exactly said how I feel. I don't care. Yes, there's some personal things in one of these many events, but it ultimately doesn't matter here in rural Wyoming. Yeah. And that personal perspective also matters. And not getting too caught up in someone else's notion of the big picture. We have to sort of make that call for ourselves. What is the proper perspective? Not always the big perspective in terms of geography, but the big perspective in terms of time and in terms of our own jurisdiction and realm of influence.
And there's so much going on in everyone's life every day. It's like, we're people down here on the ground, going to work, making plans, doing stuff. And it's like, who are these people that have time for this shit to be their job?
Yeah. They are getting paid in many cases.
Yeah. And, and it's sort of like, okay, I'm an American. I can participate in our system. I can have concerns. I can have opinions, but that is not the center of my life. And it's like, I can say, I can step back, from a solar perspective. And I'm not alone in that, because I'm not, we have many guys in our group, and we're building a culture. It's not just like, well, one day we have the opportunity to live in the culture that we're creating in this moment, and taking the correct perspective is part of that.
Yes. And in order to create that culture, we can't allow our eyes to be constantly diverted to whatever's new, the latest thing. Did you see Roland makes a very clever comment that Andrew wanted to like more? He said, how exhausting life would be if one were obligated to have an emotional reaction to every instance of injustice. Yes.
In a mental hospital.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or you'd turn up as Patrick Bateman giving the Sri Lanka speech,
Yeah.
Just phone in your emotions. Come on, Bryce. There's more important things than Sri Lanka we need to worry about. We need to worry about ICE in Minneapolis. And we need to worry about the Somali fraud scams and what Gavin Newsom is doing these days. Anyways, yeah. Return to the penguin. Run to the mountains. That's where
there's so many ways to look at that penguin. There's the thing, like when I'm kind of like,
it's great, yeah.
There's a version of that penguin that's doing something that I do, like with family, like when I'm kind of in a place where I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself, or, I say that I'm going to disappear in the night. So earlier I was looking more at the penguin and watching him walk away, and I was like, oh, that's me disappearing in the night. Don't know where I'm going, but I'm going to disappear in the night.
Yeah.
That's a feeling that I think I don't think I'm the only one that has that.
Well, I get yelled at for disappearing at social events sometimes too. So it might be that inner penguin in all of us yearning to break free. So, anyways, that seems enough for icing penguins today. Do we have any more comments in here?
They go hand in hand, actually, penguins and ice.
I know. That's why I set up the title.
You're smart.
I try to be clever sometimes. My dad pun humor is slowly ratcheting up with time, but it's good. Penguins, ice. I think the penguin was ultimately the better story of the week. As interesting as that is, there's something about Greenland, but there are no penguins there, so I don't know if we really care. And I'm sure some nonsense is going on in Africa, because there always is. And something, Ukraine, NATO. Do we care about West Bank anymore? Did we ever care? I don't think so. I think it's in Africa somewhere.
Is that in Florida?
It will be. It will be soon. Anyways, enough jokes for today. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Tune in next week, and we will see you soon. Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.